Good afternoon. I'm Suzanne Borden, Moment Magazine's Zoominar producer. I want to thank you for joining us for this very important conversation, the Israel-Hamas War Through the Eyes of a Writer, with Fania Oz-Salzberger and Amy Schwartz. This program is being recorded and is available on our website at momentmag.com. We will continue hosting conversations in the coming days and weeks, and Moment's editorial team is updating our website with new articles daily. Again, you can find all of this at momentmag.com. Now for today's program. Fania Oz-Salzberger is an Israeli historian, essayist, and activist who has worked for decades for Israeli-Palestinian peace. She is Professor Emerita of History at the University of Haifa and author of numerous books and articles, including Jews and Words, co-authored with her father, Amos Oz. Fania is a regular columnist for Moment magazine. Joining Fania today is Amy Schwartz, Moment Magazine's opinion and book editor, as well as editor of the magazine's popular Ask the Rabbi section. Please welcome Fania Oz-Salzberger and Amy Schwartz.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for signing on. And thank you especially to Fania. Fania, it's such a pleasure to speak with you directly rather than emailing about your columns. Thank you for making the time in this terrible month, and I hope you won't mind my mentioning that you told us a few minutes ago not to worry if air raid sirens went, you would just carry the Zoom down into the shelter. So that lets us in America have
yes.
sense
but
of.
it's not very likely to happen over here, thank goodness, in Zichron Yaakov, but it
But
already
just
happened.
just so we appreciate the difference between where we're sitting and where you're sitting. And thanks also for the brilliant commentary you've been writing for us. I'm hoping we'll throw a link to your most recent column in the chat. So we wanted to talk to you today about the role of the writer in wartime. I mean, we want to talk about a lot of things that are going on, but that's our theme. So let's start generally. The writer has a heavy responsibility to tell the story of what's going on, even while also shaping it and taking part in it. So you're doing both of those things. You've led protests, you've organized things. You're an activist, as your bio says, and you've been a voice, and you're also a narrator. Can you talk about that a little bit? The tension between those two roles. How do you manage?
Yes, thank you for the question, Amy. I will take one step backward to begin with to say that everybody over here in Israel, in my family, in my many circles, on the streets, on television, are shell-shocked. Still now, after two weeks, just over 2 weeks. A lot of people are behaving uncharacteristically in everywhere I look. People are carrying a terrible, heavy grief. And it's all very raw. All this is true for writers and non-writers alike. It may not be true for the soldiers and the people who are trying to navigate the ship. They are at work trying to save and navigate the ship. But everyone who has a little time to think is still going through visions of horror. And I mean some of the stuff you see on the internet, but not only that. We are all interconnected. It's a small country. And yes, as a storyteller, I'm attuned to stories, but there is a staggering number of stories going around. Not rumors, not urban myths, but stories from people that I know or people who are known to somebody I know. It goes that near. Of miracles and their opposites during the Hamas invasion to the southern Israel region it temporarily conquered. I have a friend who was there in Kibbutz Be'eri for 18 hours in his safe room, his shelter room, with the battle raging and the victims screaming outside. He told us very little, kibbutznik resilience and even sense of humor, but the stories are staggering. And right now, people write to me, we are at a loss for words people from abroad, good friends from abroad. Over here, we are not lost for words at this phase. Maybe we will enter a phase of shocked silence a little later, but right now there are so many things going on. News items, stories, new discoveries. The funerals are only just beginning. They've only just begun last week. So, while the rest of the world has gone on and mostly reporting about Gaza now, which is justifiable, but there is a dissonance here. The dead Jews are old news, more than 2 weeks ago. But we are burying the dead these days and getting more and more information about people whom we hoped were alive but are not, or people who are in Gaza held captive. It is a rolling trauma. What does a writer do during a collective rolling trauma? I don't have a theoretical answer for this. I can tell you what I've done, some of my friends. First of all, I've gone Twitter. This is what I do most of the time, because many of my thoughts take shape in short sentences, very short sentences trying to describe, to catch, to grasp the abominations that have been happening. But also many short sentences trying to encapsulate the rage that is beginning to roll like thunder throughout much of Israeli society. So, yes, tweeting is also narrating, and I write articles for Moment magazine, and I talk to journalists from many countries. But you are facing a shell-shocked writer in a shell-shocked and presently traumatized society. How much of our narration will become valuable documentation we are yet to see.
Do you want to talk about the rage a little bit? I mean, you said pretty soon we'll start to feel the rage. I mean, is that...
Well, this war was sudden and brutal, but it happened after 9 months of an ongoing social and political chasm in Israel, as I think most of you know. So it wasn't a cheerful, everyday, happy-go-lucky Israel that suddenly got hit by this calamity. It was an Israel torn apart, ripped apart, and I am voicing, of course, my own opinions, as I do also in my columns and in my other posts. This society has been ripped apart systematically for about a decade, maybe more, by political persons who followed this as a policy, who got their base, their own voters from among the disaffected who were happy to listen to the chants of war. Sephardi, Mizrahi, Ashkenazi, the religious and the secular, the right and the left were presented as dire enemies to each other. And most of the poison, and this is important to say, and I will not mince my words, most of the poison was orchestrated from right to left, from Benjamin Netanyahu's circles and many of his government ministers in previous governments and in this extreme rightist one, towards the liberals, towards the left, towards the people wishing to defend the Supreme Court from the attacks it took from Netanyahu himself. People who wanted to defend Israeli separation of power and democracy. This was the thing only 2.5 weeks ago. And so we were already in the danger of either of falling apart or perhaps of, with difficulties, renegotiating a new social contract for Israel. That was our hope, my hope.
You were very active in the protest movement.
And we were already preparing, drafts for a constitution on which most sane Israelis would be able to sign. And we were working hard while battling against the present government, which is not only threatening Israeli separation of powers, but also displayed a vile racism, misogyny in some of the words and in the policies already enacted of some of its ministers. So we were in the midst of a democracy crisis when Hamas fell upon us. And what happened is two things. One of them is very good news. The other not so. The good news is the same civil society that ran the protest overnight, days, weeks before the government took hold of what was going on, overnight became a headquarters of very effective activism and help and relief to the people affected by the attack. It was the actual organizations that constituted the protest movement, who organized, who fundraised, who immediately went, some of the members also went into battle, but many of them immediately went over to help to accommodate the evacuees, to help out the people who had actually seen hell with their own eyes. There are wonderful things happening all over the country.
So
people are volunteering. People are hugging one another longer than I've ever seen Israelis hug one another. And I'm proud to say that my two sons are running accommodation for the people of the town of Sderot that was wholly evacuated now in Tel Aviv. So everybody is doing their share. This is the good thing. The bad thing is that some of the players in Netanyahu's immediate circles, and I'm being very cautious here, are continuing to operate the poison machine, as we call it in Hebrew. Even now, there are posts going on the social media, and there are diatribes being held in Channel 14, which is the Bibi channel, pointing the finger, the blame for this disaster at the left, the protesters, the pro-democracy movement, against, and this is probably well-funded, against the army and the Shin Bet and the other security services, but this is where they want to stop.
So
Netanyahu and his people truly believe that they're going to walk out of this worst era in Israeli history scot-free.
Wow, that's a narrative we have not yet abroad. We haven't heard yet. The story we've been hearing, the theme has been that this has united Israelis as
but it has. But it has. There is a good solid 80% of Israelis, Jews and Arabs, religious
Arabs
and secular, left and right, who believed that Netanyahu should go as soon as possible, by the way.
So
that
how
he should go.
yeah.
We
Can
do
that
not
happen?
trust him anymore to lead us. And there's more uniting these sane 70 or 80%, that they are taking part in one of the most beautiful civil defense and resilience dynamics that ever took place in history. This is something to be proud of.
Tell us more about the cooperation between Jews and Arabs, or a lot of people, we're not hearing much about the Arab population of Israel, for instance.
Oh, I can give you things that are running on the channels here and in the news here, and whenever we come across these pieces of news, we are very happy to circulate them. A lot of Arab individuals and communities, including whole villages, neighborhoods, and cities, immediately rose to the challenge, invited evacuees from the south to come live with them, cooked and sent out food in masses to the evacuees and now also to the army, to the soldiers. There are dozens of such initiatives in Arab society. This is the complete opposite of what our racist national security minister, Itamar Ben-Gvir, the pyromaniac, said at the very beginning of the war, he said, oh yes, now the Israeli Arabs will all take their illegal weapons and attack the Jewish population. And he was almost hoping for it in a way, because, you know, the lunatic right of Israel has decided that crises and wars such as these should be an opportunity to drive out all Palestinians from Gaza, all Palestinians from the West Bank, and they're even talking about the Arab citizens of Israel. So, of course, he was hoping against hope that the Arab population will rise against the Jewish population in Israel. That did not happen. The opposite has happened. And I'm glad to say that some of my dear friends who are Palestinian Israelis are very much in the effort of explaining Israel to their brethren abroad and taking part in the relief operations here in Israel.
That sounds like something new. Am I right in thinking that's a new thing we haven't seen before? Especially what you said about Arab Israelis taking the
there was no
story.
comparable sympathy. There was no comparable empathy of many Arab citizens during former so-called rounds in Gaza. And I have to say, the situation is very, very slippery and dangerous. And if Israel continues to hit Gaza, which I'm not saying that it should not, it should definitely aim at the terrorists and their commanders. But if humanitarian suffering in Gaza grows beyond a certain line, or maybe, God forbid, a one-time disaster like was falsely reported with the hospital that was not bombed by Israel, if such a thing happens, then sympathies among Arab Israelis might turn against us. Even the sympathy of some of our friends abroad might turn against us. And we, the Israeli critics of the government, also have our moral red lines to draw. Right now, as far as I am concerned, and I think a significant part of the Zionist left, there must be war against Hamas. Delay it, postpone it, bring all the abducted, the hostages, the prisoners of war safely back home, by all means. But we will not be able to live with Hamas on our borders. So you see how complicated the whole situation is with us, people of my mindset, really having to work in two fronts at the same time, the inner Israeli domestic battleground of opinion and our, not just criticism anymore, rage at our prime minister and government. And of course, with the other typing hand, to do our best to make battle against what seems like millions of social network trolls or fools or ignorance who have risen against Israel in such a facile and easy way.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you a general question about that, but you've gone there sort of organically. I mean, we're talking about narratives. When you look at the stories that are being told about Israel, particularly insofar as you can tell what's being said abroad, I mean, do you recognize your reality in them, or has it spun off somewhere that doesn't connect to reality? I mean, you're talking about trolls, but sort of bigger, is it bigger than trolls, or do you think?
Yes, there are, of course, serious intellectuals and artists and media outlets who have taken up Gaza sympathy 100% and have either ignored what the Hamas did to Israelis or have waved it away. When we bring out the stories and the pictures of the worst kind, what people on the internet demand, proof of what have happened, what I find interesting in my own Twitter feed is how many people, anti-Israel people, are refusing to believe that Hamas did those things. And I find a little bit of hope in that sort of thing. I mean, they are on automated pilot, like much of the radical left in Europe and the United States. Not in Germany, by the way, but in Europe, Britain, the United States. They're on automatic pilot. They're Israel haters. Some of them are anti-Semitic. This is bad enough. You have to choose your battles. I cannot battle each of them, but I try to talk to people who are supposed to be serious people. And still many of them refuse to believe the facts that are being shown to them, the mutilated bodies, etc. And it's this endless internet round of this must be a fake, this must be a Photoshop. And I find a little bit of hope there that some humaneness has remained in those Israel bashers.
That's interesting because they too have a red line. They just don't want to admit it. Their way of having a red line is to say, if that had happened, I'd have to change my mind. So because I don't want to change my mind, it can't have happened. Right? Is that what you're saying?
Yes, that's what I'm saying. And, the truth has been a victim of the digital universe since its very beginning, but no time before has the truth been such a victim. We are fighting, you call them narratives, many of them are not sophisticated narratives or stories, but pure, raw, unadulated hate. And some of it is facile virtue show off. That is, look, I'm a human being and my heart goes out to the little children in Gaza. By the way, so does mine.
Yeah.
But what about the little children in Otef Aza, in the kibbutzim, who were butchered, for the lack of a better word? And when you ask these people, they say either it didn't happen, it's a lie. Where is the proof? We have proof online now, but no proof, no level of proof will satisfy them. Or they say, well, these children were settlers, children of settlers, colonialists. There is a context, as the United Nations Secretary General unhappily put it the other day. Or they say we couldn't care less. We couldn't care less. But I'm a fighter now. We on the social networks, many of us are, and as I said, we choose our battles and we try to target the confused. This has to be done also on many American campuses, I take it.
Right.
We try to target the confused.
People who haven't made up their minds. People
who
don't know.
Who don't know.
Yeah, who don't know what to think.
My late father, Amos Oz, had a wonderful saying, which I've been repeating often in the last 2 weeks. He used to say, whoever does not distinguish between degrees of evil is doomed to become a servant of evil. And this echoes very strongly with me. So I wrote in one post, the writer, the 3-line, 6-line writer. Is there a difference between a Gazan child killed in an air raid by a pilot who did his best to target only terrorists, and between a kibbutz child who was slaughtered in front of his parents, and so on? No, there is no difference between the two dead children, but there is a world of difference between the men who caused their death. And whoever does not understand this, does not understand degrees of evil, has lost their moral backbone.
Right. You alluded to that also in the column you wrote for us. That was a theme, the degrees of evil. Yeah, and so in other words, these people who are confused and who say, "Oh, it's all so terrible. I just don't take a side." That's something you're fighting, right? The idea of saying, "Oh, they're all terrible, so we can't make."
Being confused basically serves the bad guys in every emergency situation. Confusion is part of what the terrorists are trying to sow in Western and not only Western hearts and minds.
Mm.
So yes, we have to fight confusion. And I would suggest to anyone who wants to help us these days, to help Israel. And I'm talking about my kind of Israel, a patriot and a Democrat and a lover of this country. If you want to help us, try to choose your battles and talk to those among your friends and acquaintances and colleagues and online connections who might listen to reason, who might listen to truth. And still, it's not black and white, it's complex. What is happening in Gaza today is not black and white. But what happened in the kibbutzim and the towns of southern Israel was black, no white.
Right. Well,
that's the kind of message that I would like to send out.
That's interesting. I mean, just from, I don't know if you've been watching some of the people in the U.S., Jewish groups in the U.S. seem to be spending a lot of effort trying to get university presidents, for instance, to make stronger statements. And and those are. I wonder if that's. Do you think that's a useful thing? I mean, are those the people we need to?
Yes. I think I've also been writing to colleagues in many universities in the world, and yes, I think that these are the people that we have to talk seriously with, to talk moral philosophy with, because these are questions of moral philosophy. Mm-hmm. And they're not going away, and they will eventually visit the West too. Mm-hmm. I'm afraid.
So no, go on.
I wanted to say something on a positive note about the people here, because some people are leaving Israel now, especially people with little children who are afraid and so on. But the vast numbers of Israelis are not only staying put, but up in arms in the best sort of way, in the civil sense. Many of them, of course, are recruited, like one of my sons, and wearing uniform now and being part of the military effort. Blessed. But the civil society is beyond my highest expectations in what is done, of course, in absence of functioning governmental input, certainly during the first 10 days after the beginning of the war. Government ministries, many of them superfluous, created in order to have Netanyahu supporters hold portfolios, did nothing and went on sitting on their huge budgets. Even the ministries who were supposed to step in right away, the Home Ministry, the Treasury, Education, complete shock and loss of control. The only system that worked very well was the health system. And again, not so much thanks to the government, but thanks to the people on location. Right. So, civil society stepped into the vacuum and is doing beautifully, but civil society cannot run Israel for long. Someone has to run Israel, to defend Israel at home and abroad.
Israel's not a place that can manage without a leader, it seems like. Yeah.
Yes. So, the joke goes here that we have a wonderful leader, and that is President Biden. And they are all, even some of the right-wingers, the diehard right-wingers, kind of fell in love with Biden when he came over and gave this wonderful, wonderful speech, which showed us not only what a wonderful friend he is and the United States is to us at time of need, but everything that our own prime minister is not. So this was a very echoing experience, and I'm very grateful for it. And I want to tell the people sitting here in this Zoominar that we are grateful to you. We can only solve it ourselves, but we are deeply grateful for your support, and support is entitled to include criticism. So criticism is part and parcel of this war from the very beginning. Everything will have to be checked. What happened? What were the failures? Certainly military, intelligence. I was an intelligence office in the Israeli army 40 years ago. I'm not around there anymore, but I know how deep the investigation will have to go. But still, looking at all this sad failure and crash of our sense of security and the crash in global acknowledgement of our right to live securely, and our own inner doubts and criticism about how to thrash Gaza, targeting the bad guys hiding among the innocents.
It's a question of how, right? Not a question of
when. It's a question of how, I'm afraid. All these heavy-hearted thoughts are alleviated by these two candles, the rise of Israeli civil society and the help and empathy, intelligent, critical empathy that we are getting from our best friends around the world.
So you're feeling as the sort of the second and third day story on the Biden support has been that he's so supportive and Israelis love that, and now he's kind of behind the scenes shading into advice and criticism. And you think Israel is still with him on that as he starts to sort of, as he reminds about the laws of war and things like that, he's not going to lose. Israelis won't lose that.
Some of the poison machine on the net has already started to revile Joe Biden after they turned in his favor for a while, but now they accuse him for blocking the ground entry into Gaza. However, in the last 2 days, it became absolutely clear that Netanyahu himself is interested in telling the nation that we are slowing down on ground entry. So Biden is off the hook for a while.
Right. It's not his fault.
There is a huge propaganda machine going on too, but most Israelis wouldn't buy that. And we are doing our best to judge for ourselves. And at this point, to wait and see if there's any way we can bring back the 222 abducted persons, including family of friends of mine. And then go on to eradicate Hamas. This way has to be followed. How to do it? How to eradicate Hamas without harming their own live-in hostages, that is, the innocent Palestinians around them. By the way, not all civilians are innocent. You know that among the 3,000 odd Gaza men who entered Israel on that Black Saturday, there were about 1,000 civilians. And some of the most horrific crimes were apparently committed by civilians and not by the trained Hamas troops, although they did their share too. Even here in the last 2 days, about women and children from Gaza who were driven to the kibbutzim in order to collect goods and to eat in kitchens when the Jewish family was hiding in the safe room, and so on. So there are many civilians in Gaza, I'm saying with a torn heart, who are not innocent. But this is beside the point when it comes to our moral lines. And we should do our best to diminish harm to innocent civilians, as much as we can. This is as peacenik as I would go now, I'm afraid, because I do not see how we continue to live, how my friends from the kibbutzim on the border will continue to live with Hamas in control behind the fence.
I wanted to ask a more general question about the narrative. It's a stupid word for what's going on when it's reality, but we were talking before about all these people needing more and more proof, and somehow not being satisfied unless they see atrocities on Instagram. And this is, I know it's something that Israelis and the Jewish people generally have, unfortunately, a lot of experience with. But how do you deal with talking about the unspeakable, the things that are beyond description, things that are so horrific that talking about them almost reduces them. How are you? I mean, on the one hand, we heard a round of warnings at this end. Don't let your kids see social media because all this stuff is going to be on social media. Tell them not to go on social media. And on the other
Right.
hand, you have the IDF making, saying to the press, look, we have to show you this so you'll understand. You don't have to
Yeah,
reproduce.
the IDF decided to show some horrific footage to the
Yeah.
press only about 2 or 3 days ago. That is 10 days into the war, when we realized that so many ordinary people out there simply do not believe us and ask for proof. So it was screened. On day 2 or 3 of the war, my 2 sons are in their 20s said to us, Mama and Papa, don't watch those movies. And I told them that I've already seen some of them. What I do on X, Twitter, is distribute an official document and a few posts from serious journalists who describe in words, verbally, some of the things that happened. And this is not an easy reading at all. This is horrid. This is worse than what I've read in literature all my life. Holocaust stories, it's more or less equivalent. What happened is not equivalent historically to the Holocaust, of course, but the zoom in dynamic of it, unfortunately, was reminiscent. So what I do and what I advise our friends to do is to circulate, to share the official government of the Israeli pathologists who described some of the horrors they saw, other verbal descriptions of people who have been on the spot, of course. The audio is very effective. It's halfway between seeing and reading words. There are 2 audios from today. The audio of the young party goers saying goodbye to their families when they are hiding or in the cars and being massacred one by one, and there is an audio of their farewell words to their families. And the second audio is the young Hamas freedom fighter calling his parents from the mobile phone of a woman he had just murdered. He murdered both of them, she and her husband, in a kibbutz. And he calls his parents to brag in a great excitement and glee that he's already killed 10 Jews with his own hands. So yes, if you don't want to watch the footage, you might want to listen to the audio.
Right. That way you preserve your own humanity, but you still get a sense of it. The story I read,
some nightmares, yes.
The story I read about that guy bragging, the Hamas guy bragging to his parents, almost made it sound as if the parents don't actually seem so excited about this. They're
they were.
So they're all. Yeah, I haven't.
The parents were full of joy. Maybe they pretended to be full of joy. I can't tell. I'm just telling you that there are many non-innocent civilians in Gaza, and this is the heartbreaking truth.
Yeah. So let's step back from the morass for a second. I'm sorry these conversations are, it's not, I'm sure you have them in your head all the time. So
not only in my head, by the way, Amy, that we Israelis are very open and direct, and we talk to our friends and to total strangers in the supermarket, and we talk about these things.
That's good, right?
And the level of distress is anyhow so high that in a way bringing it out is probably more helpful than anything else.
Yeah. So I mean, the other thing, it's almost too early to think about, but the other aspect of the writer's role is of course has to do with memory. And I mean, a million years ago, when we first thought about having this event, when we didn't realize how bad just how terrible the event October 7th had been, we were thinking, 50 years ago, you and I were probably about the right age to have been children during the shock of the Yom Kippur War. I mean, do you retain a feeling from that of does that are there echoes from that shock that you remember, not because it was the same, but just because you were a child?
Well, of course, it was different as a child, but I still remember the palpable fear of the adults around me. By the way, I go back to 1967. I was 7 years old, and there was fear before the first day of the war. Yom Kippur, there were about 2 or 3 weeks of great concern. But you have to remember that in Yom Kippur, no civilians were actually hurt.
Mm, yeah.
Maybe there were a very small number of cases. I'm not even sure about that. It
Yeah,
was
no.
the soldiers who laid their life down to save, and this was an existential threat for Israel. What's happening now is not an existential threat. Maybe not yet. Maybe it would be if Hezbollah, Iran, whatever, step in. It's not an existential threat, but it is a death toll for the sense of security we had as citizens.
Mhm.
And of course, the Netanyahu government is now telling us to buy guns to defend our homes. They've suddenly gone American on us. It's not, in my mind, a good thing at all, and it is not reassuring. So not only for the people living on the border of Gaza who are directly hit,
But everyone.
but
Yeah.
for everyone, the people in the Galilee living on the border with Hezbollah.
Mm.
We have lost a very valuable, long-held sense of personal security as an Israeli civilian. It was marred by terror attacks, but there was a sense that our army is defending our borders, and this is gone.
Can you
We have to
can it come?
think about it.
Do you think you'll get that back? Is that
Well, we
something?
might. No, if after this terrible valley of death, Israel emerges, and some of us hope that it will, into an era of reassessing and rebuilding and reforming and changing from within, not the people are wonderful, but the authorities,
Mhm.
the army to some degree.
Mm.
Definitely the government and its the whole executive will have to be rebuilt with better people there, with people who can rise to challenges, people who can lead the nation, and people who can bring relief and emergency treatment in less than 10 days. So we shall have to rebuild many aspects of the state of Israel, and maybe at some point in time we shall rebuild our sense of security in our own rulers and defenders. For now, in civilians, I trust. And that's a great deal.
I like that. In civilians, I trust. Yeah, that's. I bet it's even better in Hebrew. So, and I know that's the role of, that's another thing about the writer, is it's your job to imagine a better future. So, sounds like.
Yeah, but not only writers. I'm happy to tell you that a lot of people in Israel, even now, even as they are working with the, with the injured and with the evacuees, are already beginning to think, what should Israel look like the day after? And the reason why Netanyahu doesn't want to see the day after is, I suspect, the same reason that he keeps telling us it will be a very long war.
Oh, interesting.
For him, a long war is a kind of an advantage at this stage. In one sense, it is, because you can, of course, make perhaps more rational decisions, be more cautious, be more careful, wait for chances to kill off the ringleaders and the terrorists, and avoid the population. But the real reason why he wants a long war is because he knows, and his ministers know, and his cronies know, and his journalists know, and we know, the society, the protest movement, the newly shocked and horrified ex-Likudniks, who now understand something. We know that after the war, the day of reckoning will come. Not, God forbid, in any undemocratic way, But the man, the wife, the son, the cronies, the ministers will all have to go democratically, overwhelmingly.
Yeah, yeah. So, I haven't even asked you about your father, I mean, that's part of memory, I guess. I know you're channeling his wisdom about degrees of evil. Do you think about how he would have responded to this? Are you glad he didn't live to see it?
Many people ask me what would he have said and tell me how much they miss him. And I say, I never thought I would, but I say I don't miss him here at all. I'm so glad he's not around. It would have shattered him. He would have made clear-headed points. I'm sure he would. And I'm trying to make my own clear-headed points and sometimes to echo what I think that he would have said. But boy, am I glad that he's not around to see this, because it would have broken his heart. He was a kibbutznik. I was a kibbutznik. Once kibbutznik, always kibbutznik. And to see those kibbutzim overrun by monstrous brutes, and to hear the stories of our kibbutznik friends. And by the way, many of his friends have lost somebody, our family friends. Terrible. I'm glad he's not around. He would have, I think, joined the voices telling Netanyahu to go now. Yes, in the middle of a war. Telling Netanyahu to resign now. He would have joined with empathy and love to the survivors of the kibbutzim and the towns that were attacked. He would have had enough love in his heart to think about the Palestinian innocents in Gaza. And he would have been proud and reached out to the Arab Israeli citizens who are taking part in this national disaster in such an open-hearted way. All these things I'm sure that my father would have done, but I'm happy to do it for him by proxy and to save him the experience.
Yeah. Well, we're gonna go to questions in a second. There are quite a few, but first, I just want to ask one sort of practical question about, so like, for instance, what will you do tomorrow? How does your life, I mean, you're doing so many things. I mean, don't tell us, anything too personal, but give us a sense of just daily life, and then we'll go to questions.
Well, it's funerals, not tomorrow, but it's funerals. It's talking to a lot of people, family and friends, and trying to hug them as much as I can. It's supporting, my mom, brother, and 2 sons are in Tel Aviv. They have more booms almost every evening, and also a round of support. Having my son over and seeing them run their little headquarters of helping the evacuees of Sderot housed in Tel Aviv. This is a moment of naches, a moment of family pride. But most of the time I'm on the social networks or talking to journalists, like now, and trying my best with my little voice to help humanity win. Trying to fight the horrible firestorm, as my father once wrote, with a teaspoon, my own little teaspoon of water. Yeah. He said, if you see a huge fire, bring a bucket of water. If you don't have a bucket, a glass. If you don't have a glass, a teaspoon will do. Everybody has a teaspoon. And I'm calling upon the friends of Israel and the friends of truth and the friends of morality in this evil time to add their teaspoon. But please, guys out there, not the listeners here, but guys out there, educate yourself before you hit enter. Educate yourself.
It's a big thing to ask, but it's the main thing. That's the main thing. Just educate. So, Fania, we have a bunch of questions. One I guess I'll start with the last question first because it sort of speaks on from that. What are the best or the most useful words to use in reply to those who blame Israel for the humanitarian crisis in Gaza rather than blaming the terrorist attack? Do you have the best words to use?
Well, those I mentioned before from my dad, degrees of evil, degrees of evil. And the question of intention. What does the pilot intend to do when he bombs Gaza? And of course, they might argue with the truth of it, but the truth of it is he intends to harm as few uninvolved people as he can. And what was the intent of the Hamas brute entering kibbutz Be'eri? So yeah, these are my keywords among others.
Good arguments. Another person asks, you've talked about public sentiment towards Netanyahu and towards the government. Is there specifically anger at the intelligence community? Do you have how do people? And yes, I saw the head of the Shin Bet took public responsibility.
Yes.
How are people feeling about that?
So did the army chief of staff. He was the first to take public responsibility, and he said that when everything is investigated, he will take the full share of responsibility and blame, by the way. Netanyahu tonight has said something that he will be answering questions, but never took the blame for himself. So yes, there are a lot of questions about the intelligence community. As I said before, I once upon a time served in it, and I still have many friends connected, and nowadays the young generation, children of friends. And they're, of course, the first to want to know what went wrong. So there's talk about that, but anger only comes from the orchestrated extreme right poison, who say off with everybody's heads right away except Netanyahu. That's what they're up to. So no, the anger is not yet there at those responsible within the military because we don't know yet. We want to wait for the fact finding. We want to wait for the most based and vetted account of what happened. But there is enormous rage against Netanyahu and the people around him. This is already palpable, and it will erupt like a tsunami within, I don't know, days or weeks or the worst months, depending on the war, but it will erupt like a tsunami. You will witness this soon enough.
We'll be watching. Another person asks does the Israeli left understand the goals and objectives of Hamas and its supporters in a different way from previously? I mean, were there people on the Israeli left who did not appreciate the goals of Hamas? I mean, that's certainly true of some parts of the American left, but was that true of the Israeli left as well?
Certainly the Zionist left had nothing to do ever with the Hamas or supporting Hamas. It's been a critique. You know, my dad wrote an article about it back in 1995 when Rabin was still a prime minister. And of course, Rabin did not support Hamas, but the extreme right already understood that it's a good idea to support Hamas because this way they wouldn't have ever to make peace with the Palestinians because Hamas is opposed to peace. And my father wrote all that in 95. So the Israeli left had nothing to do with Hamas, certainly not in the current horrific era, but not before that. Some members of the Israeli left are having a reckoning now about their hopes for peace with the Palestinians, the most moderate Palestinians. And I've seen posts by friends and people I know who said, I don't know yet, I'll have to rethink it, maybe not in our generation, maybe we were overly hopeful. Maybe our parents taught us to expect peace around the corner, and this is not going to be. So yes, there is a reckoning within the Israeli left, but I really think that it should be a relatively simple reckoning to make compared to the reckoning required by the Israeli right.
Yeah, interesting. I have a few questions. Actually, I think one question. This will be the second to last question because it's somewhat trivial, but it's funny. One of our observers wants to know if the Salzberger in your name means you have some connection to the Salzberger family that owns the New York Times.
Yeah, well, this is an opportunity to thank everyone for their questions. There's some very good questions here. As to this one, I can just about answer in the affirmative because my husband, Eli Salzberger, belongs to a branch of the Salzberger family. They spell it with a U, we spell it with an A, but the same Salzberger family, something like second or third cousins.
That's funny.
So not near enough. But we did meet him, Arthur Oz-Salzberger, and very nice man. Just in the meeting.
Yeah. There are two or three questions along the same lines, and I think on this after this I'll let you go, and I'll thank you. This is kind of a hard question, honestly. I think the general thrust is of several people here who are fighting the social media wars, saying, you know, are these people who are attacking, are they really ignorant, or are they just anti-Semites? And how do you keep going? I mean, how can you keep going on this argument when it seems the narrative, when it seems so out of control?
Well, there's some simple questions that you can ask in order to clarify this, such as, is the life of a Jewish child worth the same to you as a life of a Palestinian child? And any answer which is not yes should probably stamp that person as an anti-Semite. Anti-Semites out there who are not fully aware of their own anti-Semitism. As I said before, dear friends, you have to pick your wars in the circles around you and online, and try to get to those people who are honestly and openly confused or under-informed. There's so many of those. People who want to be on the side of the angels.
Right.
If they keep denying that their angels include a few demons, let go of them. But when I see someone who seems open-minded or intelligent, I give it a try. Good luck and thank you.
Fania, thank you so much for talking with us, for talking about all these painful things. You give us hope, as always, just by your clarity. We're eager to see what you write next. We're all wishing you, Oz, like your name, strength. And we're thinking of you, and thank you so much for this conversation, and stay safe.
Thank you so much, Amy, and thank you to all the participants. I appreciate it. You are welcome to follow my Twitter feed, to argue, to talk. It's all about, the book I co-authored with my father, Jews and Words, and I wish to God that we will soon go back into the era of words and not bombs and guns. Thank you, Amy. Thanks to Moment Magazine. Thanks to Suzanne. And goodbye to everyone.
Goodbye. Shalom.